All right, intro time. Hello YouTube, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to the studio. Today we're gonna be talking about the EOS or EOS R5, and I'm gonna be looking at some of the key features with this camera and the reasons why I really love using this camera. I've had it since day one, pre-ordered it, picked it up July 2020, been shooting with it ever since. And in my humble opinion, as somebody who's been shooting Canon cameras since 2005, I think this is hands down the best photography camera that Canon has ever made. Now we have the 5DSR and the 1DX, but I think the sensor on this camera is just a little bit better dynamic range, the sharpness, the clarity. Plus you can't put RF glass on the 5DSR and 1DX cameras. This RF glass is just like, RFL glass is like Zeiss. It's phenomenal glass. But we're gonna talk about that in another video. In this video, we're just gonna talk about the R5 and why I think it's so dang special. And if you're wondering about buying the R5 in 2023, got a video about that there where I talk about all the things. So definitely check that video out after this video. But in my opinion, if you're looking to buy this camera, the best time to buy it will be Black Friday, US Thanksgiving 2023. I think the price on this camera is gonna come way down. And when they announce those sales, just jump on it. Don't even think twice. This camera is so worth it. And the R5 Mark II, my prediction is July 2024 is when it's gonna be available on the market. All right, so with that being said, let's jump into the video and talk about the features that I love about this camera. All right, so the first feature on the R5 that I absolutely love, and this is what makes this camera the most amazing camera in Canon's lineup. In my opinion, this is the best photo camera Canon has ever made, and it is because of the sensor. The 45 megapixel high resolution sensor in this camera is phenomenal. The first time I picked this camera up, I took some shots. I came back to my nice big 4K screen and I looked at the details. I was like, what? This camera just blows you away. You see pores, you see the eyelashes. You can see, like, with a high resolution lens, you can see all the hairs in my mustache, in my beard. I can shoot myself at, I don't know, a couple meters away and it'll just resolve everything. Which is the second point I want to make about the sensor, is that it is a high resolution sensor, meaning that you want to use lenses with the sensor that can resolve a lot of detail. So here we have the 85 1.2, we have the 28 to 70 f2, there's the 51.2 100mm macro, and there's a couple others too that resolve a lot of detail. So if you want to take advantage of the resolution of this high resolution sensor, definitely use lenses that resolve a lot of detail. And I'm not saying you can't use other lenses, like the 51.8 is like a more budget-friendly lens for the Canon system, and if you put it on the R5, it works fantastically. You get a lot of detail. But if you want those crispy, like see every little micro contrast, every detail, you definitely want to stick to the lenses that resolve a lot of detail. And in my personal opinion, based on all the Canon cameras I've used so far, this camera takes the best photos. Like, the dynamic range is incredible, the image resolution is incredible, the sensor just captures so much detail. It is absolutely fantastic. So I say this confidently that the R5 at this point in time is the best photography camera Canon has ever made. So if you're thinking about buying an R5 and you're worried, oh, you know, it was released in 2020, it's 2023 now, is it worth buying? I have a video talking about that there, but in my opinion, yes. If you're a photographer, this camera is absolutely 100% worth buying. If you're into videography, I think it's still worth buying as well, but we're gonna talk about that later. Now, I've had questions from people on YouTube asking if old EF glass works well on the R5. And yes, it does. These old EF lenses resolve a lot of detail. Now, some of the older EF-L lenses were designed for film cameras, and those are the ones that don't have the same resolving power that you would want for an R5, but it depends on what you're looking for. Like this lens, 85mm, or this 28 to 70mm, they are so sharp. Like, it is so sharp. And I find myself using like Black Pro Mist filters and the diffusers and things like that on my lenses to cut down the sharpness, especially if you're shooting a portrait headshots of people who are a little bit older and they have wrinkles in the skin. It's just like you see everything, right? So sometimes maybe you have too much resolution. So if you want to buy an older lens or a lens that doesn't have the same resolving power, you might save yourself some time in post-production. And I love shooting with these old vintage lenses. This is a nice Auto Takamar 35mm. Beautiful lens. We're gonna do some reviews with this lens on the channel. But sometimes these vintage lenses they create this beautiful image and you don't have all those details, but you get a lot of character. And the nice thing with a 45 megapixel sensor is that if you're shooting images, let's say for Instagram or whatever, and you're using some old, vintage lens, when you take that 45 megapixels and you shrink it down to 1080 by 1080 for Instagram, it just sharpens up, cleans up, looks beautiful, and you get a lot of character out of your lenses. So you don't necessarily have to buy the best quality lenses for the R5. It all depends on what you're shooting and how you want to shoot and your personal style. And it's all like, technically it's a great camera, but it all comes down to your artistic expression. How do you want to express yourself and what kind of stories do you want to tell with your photos? And you get the lenses that help tell that story. So to answer the question, yes, EF lenses work great on the R5, and I'll talk about autofocus with EF lenses in a second. All right, so now let's talk about the R5 as a video camera. And you know what? This camera got a lot of heat when it first came out because of the overheating, But Canon has really done a lot of work on this camera with firmware. You have a setting now in the menu, and you can turn it on and you can tell the camera to ignore the overheat warning so it can run longer. And you can record nice long videos now in 8K, in 4K HQ, 4K 60, 4K 120 without the camera immediately overheating, because that was the big issue in the beginning. I get it now, there's newer cameras with better video specs and internal fans and all that kind of stuff. But like the R5 can shoot 8K raw, 12 bits. Like, what else do you need? Like, really, like where are you gonna go? How's it gonna get better than that? And the beautiful thing, and I guess this is a double-edged sword, right? But the codecs you can shoot with on this camera are really beefy. You have IPB and all-I, and these are massive codecs. Like I said, it's a double-edged sword because on one hand, you get a lot of info in your codecs, and when you go to edit, you can color grade and you have a lot of room to play around and you can do a lot of things. But on the downside, unless your computer is really high-end, it's just gonna, when you're trying to scrub through your timeline, it's gonna get all choppy, which happens. I mean, that's a part of it. And that was a big complaint with this camera when it first came out. A lot of people's computers couldn't handle the video footage that was coming out of it. And you know what? I have issues with my computer too. It's not that old, but I have a 2070 Super video card. I should probably upgrade that now. It's a couple years old. But the workaround for that, there's actually two workarounds. One is you convert your video files into proxies. And if you don't know what proxies is, basically the video editor will take your big beefy codec file and make like a little version of it. And you can edit your video based on that proxy file. And then when you go to export your video, the video editing program will use the bigger file to create the final render. So you'll get all that resolution and detail and quality. But when it comes to editing, you're editing on a smaller file. So that's one of the solutions. The other solution is that Canon updated the firmware on the R5 to give us IPB Light, which is a super compressed codec, and I can edit that easily on my computer, no problem. And the beautiful thing with IPB Light, now I've made videos with all-I, IPB Light, and once the video gets uploaded to YouTube or social media and goes through the compression, you really can't tell if you shot an IPB Light or all-I. The only time it really makes a difference is if you really want to color grade your footage. And you can use IPB Light in 8K, which is awesome. So you get a nice small 8K file, which is kind of an oxymoron. You can use IPB Light in 4K HQ, which is 8K compressed down to 4K, which I'm going to talk about next. And you can also use IPB Light in regular 4K and 1080p. Let's talk about 4K HQ. And that's what I film a lot of my YouTube content on. And I mean, 8K is a little bit overkill. Unless you absolutely need 8K, I wouldn't recommend shooting it. But 4K HQ in the R5 is basically 8K footage shrunk down to 4K in the camera. So when you pull out your memory card, pop it into the computer, it's actually 4K footage. But because you're taking a larger file size and shrinking it down, or I guess a larger image and shrinking it down, it just sharpens up and cleans up completely, and you get this nice sharp image. And of course you want to use a pro mist filter or some kind of diffuser on there because it's almost too sharp. And if you just want to film and then upload to YouTube right away without color grading and doing all bunch of crazy things in your video editor, then IPB Light 4K HQ, dream setup. It works amazing. I want to talk about the fact that the R5 has 8 stops of image stabilization. That is nuts. Like, it's not gimbal smooth, but if you're smooth with your hands and you know how to use the camera, you can get some smooth footage. Now, it's not 8 stops out of the camera on its own. You've got to use a lens. Like this 24-105 has IS and the 15-35 have IS. So if you're using a lens with the image stabilization plus the IBIS in the camera, you get some really good stabilization. And then there's also digital stab. On top of that, you have, what's it called? movie digital IS and movie digital IS enhanced. And when you use those digital stabs, it crops in a little bit, so you're gonna lose a little bit of the range. But if you're filming with something like the 15 to 35, cropped onto an R7, so it's a 1.6 crop, you get a nice wide shot. So technically, if we're shooting in digital movie enhanced with the 15 to 35 on the R5, we'll get the same field of view right here. I think, yeah, so this is 15 millimeter on an APS-C crop. So that's what you can potentially get with this camera with maximum stability on. So that's pretty cool, right? Image stabilization is definitely a good thing. Now, I always argue that IBIS is useless for photography. It's more for videography, but if you're a photographer, IBIS can definitely come in handy in certain situations when you want to hold the camera still and get a long exposure. But there's just one thing to keep in mind, that if you want to use IBIS for photography, you have to be still and your subject has to be still. So if you're moving and they're moving, it just doesn't work. The video features on the R5, I think, are absolutely great. Oh, there's one more thing I want to talk about that Canon did in firmware to fix the R5. When it first came out, you got a lot of corner wobbles when you filmed on a wide angle lens. The IBIS was kind of too wobbly, and they fixed that up in firmware. Now it doesn't wobble as much. There's still a little bit of wobble, but it's not as crazy as it used to be. So thank you to Canon for that. Hopefully the firmwares keep coming and we can tighten that up. And you know what would be really nice, Canon? Like, if you're listening, it'd be great to have a menu option in the R5, or all your cameras actually. It would be a great menu option to have sort of like an IBIS sensitivity. So if we wanted a stiffer IBIS, we could set the IBIS to be more stiff, or if we want a really loose IBIS, we could set the IBIS to be really loose or neutral or whatever. But it would be cool if we had the option to control how active we want the IBIS in the camera to be. So yeah, that'd be kind of cool. All right, moving on to the next feature I love about the R5. Now, when it comes to autofocus, I think Canon made a mistake with the R6. They should have called it the R2, because these cameras have dual pixel autofocus too. So it could have been called the R2D2. Anyway, yeah, just a thought. Random thoughts in a creative head. That's how it works. Okay, so let's talk about the autofocus on the R5. There are newer cameras now with better autofocus, like the Nikon Z9, the Alpha 1, even the R7 has better autofocus than the R5. But they're not like better as in like miles ahead better, it's just like marginally better. I noticed playing around with the R7, the autofocus is really good, super snappy, super fast, but that's good because the R7 is designed as more of like a sports and wildlife shooter. It gives you that crop and that extra range, which is fantastic, and that's great. But that being said, the R5 is no slouch either. I find even when I'm shooting people, I can hold the camera over my head, and as long as I'm pointing it in their general direction and push the button, the camera will track the eyes. And even with this lens, this is an f1.285, like the depth of field is literally that tiny. It is so tiny. And the eye tracking, it just goes. It just tracks. Every shot is sharp. I mean, provided the model isn't jumping around on a trampoline and running around like crazy, like it's in a normal situation, like weddings, like it'll track the eyeball, like. And it doesn't just focus like on the eyelashes, it tracks the eyeball. Like the pupil is super sharp and the eyelashes will be blurry. Like, it is nuts. The focusing ability of this camera is absolutely incredible. And I have got nothing bad to say about it. If you're into photography, you can track people, you can track animals, you can track cars. I believe with the firmware updates, you can even track a person's face inside a car. So it'll lock onto the helmet of the driver and track that. So it's absolutely crazy. Now, when it comes to video, the tracking is also great. Now, you got to keep in mind that there's two separate menus. So if you're in photo mode, you'll get a certain menu, and if you're in video mode, you'll get a certain menu. So if you're going through the menu and you're like, it looks different, it's because you're either in photo mode or video mode. And by the way, there's a hack. You can use the MFN button to switch between photo and video modes fast. Video about it there. If you're a new R5 user and you want to know that hack, definitely set that up on your camera. But video. So you can set the sensitivity of your tracking or the stickiness of your tracking. So you can set up your camera to lock onto an eye and never let go. So for example, now with the R5, if I put this up in front of my face, as long as the camera can see my eye, it's gonna track my eye and ignore the product, which sucks if you're a YouTuber and you wanna show off products, you have to hide your face like this. But you can also set the camera up to be more, I guess, to jump between focus points faster between people. So if you're talking, it'll focus on your eye. If you put a product up, it'll focus on whatever's closer to the camera. Now, the trick to doing that with the R5 is you have to take it out of people tracking. So you can set it to track people or animals. So you have to take it out and set it to none. and then it'll track whatever's closer. So if you're doing like product stuff and you want it to track whatever's closer instead of just your eyes, then that's a trick. And the other thing you can do is you can change your rack focus speed. So if you want like super fast rack focus, now rack focus is your camera focusing from something close to far. It's a trick they use in Hollywood all the time to create emphasis and drama and create emotion in the video. So you can do that with the R5, and you can set it to have like a really slow rack focus or a really fast rack focus. Video about it there if you want to learn more about rack focus with the R5. But yeah, focusing ability and the settings in the menu to give you customizability over those focus settings. A+, man, this camera rocks. So a question I get a lot in the comments is, do EF lenses work well on the RF system? And here's the 35 1.4, 16 to 35 2.8, 50mm macro, and these were my go-to lenses when I shot with the 5D Mark III, and I had a lot of experience shooting weddings and events and things with these lenses. And I can tell you now that I'm shooting with the R5 with adapters, obviously you need an EF to RF adapter. And actually I bought a third-party adapter here. This is the JJC adapter, and it works just as good as the Canon regular pass-through adapter. Video about it over there, just like, yeah, I got a lot of videos on the R5. But yeah, these lenses work fantastic on the new RF mount, especially this noisy Cricket. It's a lot of fun. I get a lot of my B-roll shots with this camera, with this lens. But yeah, no problems. Now, when it comes to third-party EF lenses on the RF mount, I don't know. I don't own any third-party Tamrons or Sigmas or anything like that, so I don't know how to test those. Maybe I can borrow one from somebody and I'll test and I'll make a video about it. We'll compare maybe like a wide-angle Sigma versus the Canon EF. But from what I've heard online is that the autofocus on those third-party lenses works great with the new RF mount, but they're not as fast. Maybe they're a touch slower. I don't know if there's something in the programming or in the algorithm. I know Sony does something with their algorithm, so if you use third-party lenses on their cameras, they focus well, but they just focus slower than the native Sony lenses. So I don't know if Canon employs that same trick to try and entice you to buy like Canon lenses instead of third-party lenses. And that's the other thing too, like this RF mount, Canon has kind of like blocked third-party manufacturers from making third-party lenses for the RF mount, but there's a ton of EF third-party lenses, like those Sigma EF art lenses, like those are fantastic. I think those are the lenses that kind of made Canon go like, you know what, maybe we don't want third-party lenses making lenses for our systems because they're just too good. Those Sigma art lenses were really, really good. So to answer the question, do EF lenses work well on the RF body? Yeah, absolutely. And here we go. This is what I affectionately call the noisy Cricket. This is the 50mm macro, and I absolutely love this lens for B-roll, but listen to that motor. It takes you right back to like, oh yeah, this is the 90s right here, baby. Anyway, yeah. All right, another really cool feature with the R5 that they added in firmware is the ability to save your settings, all your custom settings, to a memory card. Now, it's not just one custom setting, but you can save multiple custom settings. So you can have settings for your camera for weddings. You can have settings on your camera for studio shots, for outdoor shots, for, I don't know, snow shots, for video, whatever the case may be. You can set up multiple like settings on your camera and save them to a memory card and just throw that in your bag. And let's say you have to rent a second R5. And let's say you need two R5s for a shoot. You rent another one, you take your memory card, pop it into the other R5, load up your settings from your camera onto the other camera, and boom, now you have two cameras set up identically and you don't have to go through the menu and fuss with everything. Or let's say, you know, you have to send your R5 in for repair, you get a loaner, you pop the card in, you pop all your settings onto the loaner, and it's just like your camera. And that is a fantastic feature. I believe the only other camera right now that has that feature in the Canon lineup is the R3, the R6 Mark II, the R6, the R7, the R8, the R50. None of those cameras have that feature, although I wish Canon gave that feature to those other cameras. It's a really handy feature. I don't know why Canon always plays this game where it's like, if you pay for this level of camera, you'll get these features, but you won't get them down here. I don't understand that. Just put your best foot forward with all your cameras and give people handy features. But anyway, the ability to save custom settings is a huge plus. Video about it there, also linked down below. I've had the R5 for a long time and I've made a lot of videos about it. So if you want to see other videos about this camera, definitely check out the videos on the channel. Okay, so the final feature I absolutely love about the R5, And this is just Canon cameras in general, but the R5 in specific is just ease of use. Like, this thing is just so easy to use. And you know what, as a working professional, someone who makes money with cameras in their hands, like, the last thing I want to be doing on set is like, let me go through my, how do I change, where was that setting, you know what I mean? And the R5, the menu settings, the button layout, the ergonomics, the way it feels, I guess the same thing, the way it feels in your hands, like the ability to use it, the viewfinder, the LCD, everything is just so nice. Like, you just put this in your hand. Obviously, it's gonna take you a little while to like memorize the settings and everything. It's all pretty intuitive, but you just start shooting and you go and you're on set and you're like, oh, well, I have to change this, boom, boom, boom. And the touch screen is absolutely phenomenal. You can access all the menu settings you need through the Q menu on the back of the camera, either by touching the screen or hitting the Q button, and everything's there and it's just so easy to use. And like I said before, like, as a professional, I want my equipment to get out of the way. I don't want to be thinking about my camera and my lens and all this other stuff. I just want to be focusing on my creativity and creating the shot for the client and making sure they're happy. So if I don't have to worry about my camera, that's a huge thing, just like off my mind. I just change the settings and go. And I know this camera has a bunch of different features and settings and stuff like that. All I really use is manual mode. That's it. That's all I want. That's all I need. Just give me my aperture, my shutter speed, and my ISO, and let me go boom, 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 and create my art. Now, the other nice thing about the R5 is the fact that it's the successor to the 5D series of cameras. Now, if you remember those 5D cameras, Canon had the 1D series cameras, then it had the 5Ds, and those were the professional level cameras. And the R5 is designed and built as a professional level camera. Like, I just dropped it on the table, I don't care. This thing is just gonna work, and it works, and it works, and it works. And you can be rough with it. You can throw it in a bag, throw it in a backpack, carry it around, drop it. Well, I don't mean drop it on concrete, but it can take the punishment of a professional work environment and a professional using a camera every day. Like, every day you're going someplace here, going someplace there, camera's hanging around your neck, it's in a bag, out of a bag, in a Pelican case, in a backpack, backseat of a car, whatever, it's everywhere, it's bouncing around, and the camera just works. And that's the fantastic thing. Now, obviously, those 5D cameras were tried and tested over years. This thing has only been around since 2020, but so far, so good. It just, like, I've dropped it a few times. I've taken it in the cold, in the rain, wherever, and it just goes. It just works. And that's the beautiful thing about the R5. And hopefully it holds up to the 5D series in terms of its construction and build quality and longevity. And the shutter for this thing is rated for 500,000 shots, which is crazy. So if you buy an R5, it's probably gonna last you a good 10 years. Well, it depends how much you shoot. If you shoot a lot, if you're a crazy shooter, but if you're a normal shooter, it'll probably last you about 10 years. Like, this camera is absolutely amazing. The other last feature I'm gonna talk about is the fact that, I don't know if you can see it in there, but the shutter comes down when the camera's off, which prevents dust from getting in there when you're changing your lenses out in, like, I don't know, in the forest or in a dusty area, wedding hall, events, that kind of thing. Like, yeah, I've had this camera for 3 years. I've cleaned the sensor one time. And that, I think, is absolutely incredible. To be honest, I would not even consider buying a camera that didn't have that feature. I absolutely love it. Sensor spots are the worst. All right. All right, so now we're gonna film the outro of this video with this EF 16-35. All right, so now we have this old EF lens on here, and as you can see, it's tracking my eye, no problem as I walk around through the frame. And if I distract it with the R5, it's gonna stay locked onto my eye because I have it set, well, I have the R7 set to super sticky eye tracking. So EF glass, if you're upgrading to the new RF bodies and you have old EF glass, I would actually suggest keeping your EF glass unless you absolutely have to upgrade to an RF something or other. But yeah, EF glass works fantastic. So with that being said, thank you for watching. If you want to see more content about the R5 or you have any questions about this camera, leave them in the comments below and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. This is a fantastic camera, definitely worth investing in. So yeah, with that being said, thank you for watching, really appreciate it. Hopefully I see you guys around the channel again. Check out my other content. I got a lot more R stuff or R5 stuff. And yeah, that's it. Peace out, keep shooting, and I'll see you guys in the next video.